Ladies and gentlemen, not 2 weeks ago, the United Kingdom bailed out Ireland to the tune of £8 billion. A country that does not have a common currency with it. The only difference between these two models isn't more bailouts or anything like that. The difference is that Britain runs the risk that its £8 billion investment could drastically diminish in value based on a different currency in Ireland. And that's what we're going to be talking about in our extension. 2 things. Firstly, about why, when there are crises, we need the euro to maintain stability and to make sure that bailouts work. And secondly, about why we need to manage currency fluctuations in an economy which is, for all intents and purposes, completely unified. But before that happens, some rebuttal. Firstly, on the bizarre extension that we heard from the other side. We need a devaluation-driven policy. The first thing that we would say is, we are surprised that apparently we're not only going back to lots of different currencies, but to government control of currency rates to allow them to do what China and Japan did, which was to be currency manipulators, in ways that have resulted in the United States denying trade outcomes to them. And we want to know what precisely this mechanism is. Secondly, what we'd say is that the idea that you lower your currency in order to have export-driven growth would rely on the idea that this was an export-driven growth problem. It's not. Ireland has one of the most export-focused economies in the world. It exports more software than any other country. Part of the reason it does that is because of a drastically low corporate tax. But the reason it has problems is because it has massive debts. As I said in the point of information, if those debts if those debts are denominated in a foreign currency and its currency is drastically devalued, then it could move from a situation where it has 80% of GDP in debt to 250% in the blink of an eyelid. They're looking for the wrong crisis here, and they've gotten the problem wrong. That's the reality. And Mitt's response was, well, that would only occur if Ireland or Greece were earning money in Deutschmarks, which is what it's denominated in. We have a Deutschmark now, it's called the euro, and that's exactly what happens now. The second thing that we'd say is that the idea that Greece would be paying different prices from the rest of Europe if it still had the drachma is also wrong, because there is a single market and a single economy. So once the drachma goes down drastically, the prices don't fall, the prices increase to the level that they would have been in euro, in drachma, and people are still paying exactly the same rates. But the final thing that we'd say is that given that these countries export almost exclusively to Europe, there isn't a problem with the currency being the same as for other Europeans. The actual problem that they might get is a problem of a risk premium being imposed. That is to say, other countries not engaging in trade with them, or the fear that their currency will drastically decline, and that their investments in those countries will decline in value. If I could please have a little decorum in the room. Secondly, 2 things from the opening half. The first was the assertion that bailouts are a consequence of a common currency. As I told you, they're not. The second was the idea that ran through their cases, they ran away from all the rebuttal of this half, that we need changes in mentality. We'd say 2 things. Firstly, you need changes in incentive structure, which is what's given when you have serious controls. That's why we've had the ability to change grid policy, but it's also why Eastern European countries are changing the way that their central banking systems work in expectations of these things happening. So the common currency actually changes things even before it gets there. The second thing that we'd say is that people in France are rioting in the streets as well. People don't like fiscal austerity measures, whether they're from within or without. So 2 things in extension. Firstly, crisis economics and why we need the euro in that situation. The first reason for that is that what we're in fact doing is ensuring that weak economies don't get destroyed by the decline in the value of their currency reserves in a situation in which their currency is pegged to their actual economic performance rather than the economic performance of the entire eurozone. So I've already explained this in a point of information in your rebuttal, that if Greece's earnings are denominated in drachma, which they will be, and its debt is denominated in euro or in Deutschmark or in whatever other currency, then suddenly its debt levels have drastically increased in the midst of a debt crisis rather than decreased. But that's also problematic in that the banking systems that we have here is a situation of a very small number of banks which we would expect to denominate currency in Deutschmark or in sterling, given that almost all of European financial institutions are in Frankfurt and in London, lending to a whole variety of currencies, such that it's not only governments but individual businesses that run the risk of this happening. So let's say that you're in Greece and your currency suddenly declines in value, and you have debts that are denominated in Deutschmark. Then even as a business that is still profitable, even as a business that's done nothing wrong, even in a business that is entirely efficient, you have a debt shock that forces your business to become insolvent because those people with a different currency have no concern for the fact that you're profitable, so long as you're profitable in drachma.
If a bailout and austerity is the opposition solution to massive sovereign debt, why isn't it working in Greece?
It is working in Greece. It's massively improving the situation in Greece. Like the other thing that we'd say, like, why isn't it working in Greece? Like, I don't know. It's been 3 months. I have no idea if it's working in Greece. Like even the economic indicators that you get don't know until like 3 months after a quarter is finished what inflation was in that quarter, what growth was in that quarter, and that is an incredibly reductive and silly way of arguing. And I hope that you abandon it in the next speech. The second problem in crisis economics is that bailouts become useless. We've demonstrated to you that you need to bail out other countries. Why? If you're the United Kingdom, Ireland has a different currency. But unfortunately, almost all of Ireland's business is run by companies that are from within the United Kingdom. So the problem is that if you do get a drastic decline in another economy, then you have a whole lot of domestic businesses that are harmed by that. And your economy is harmed by not being able to trade with that person as effectively. So you do want to have bailouts. The problem is that you're bailing people out in a currency that might lose all of its value. So if you give 10 billion euro to Ireland and say you can pay your public servants wages for the next 2 weeks, you might find that your 10 billion euro turns into 2 billion euro and foreign investors get out of that situation and don't want to back you up on the fact that you bet on that. So the common market means common prices, and that means that there are problems, and that means that even those public servants are in fact buying things at rates that still match the European equivalent, but just not able to buy as much. Second part of our extension is to talk about managing currency fluctuations. In the first place, a series of different currencies discourages trade because you have both a transfer cost, which is non-trivial, where it can be like several percent of the cost of the currency, and that changes the marginal interest in different things, but also a risk premium because you don't want to move money overseas for the fear that your currency you have to denominate it into will decline drastically. So it means that there is less trade between European countries, which is the whole purpose of creating a foreign market. But the second thing that we'd say, and we've seen that with businesses like Tesco's and Carrefour following the euro because they don't want to risk their currency and actually creating lower prices for people in those countries. But the second thing you do is allow your economy to be buffeted by currency rates. That's what happened in the Netherlands when it discovered oil. So you had a small economy in which the currency rate was drastically increased. It destroyed its manufacturing industry. Now, Amit wants to say we should have more control over these things. The thing about the euro now, right, is you have a currency rate that is relatively good for everyone, that protects manufacturing and commodities industries and export-driven industries. The problem there is if you get one industry that dominates in your small currency, then a whole other part of your domestic industry can be destroyed by those currency fluctuations. We can't control in the way they thought we should. They misidentified the problem as one of export. It's not. It's one of debt. And that debt problem is destroyed when prices remain the same, debts remain the same, but your ability to pay for them is drastically destroyed.